Powerful Content Podcast, your go-to source for content creation, strategy, and business inspiration. I'm your host, Mel Daniels, content strategist, coach, and speaker, empowering women across the globe to grow their business with powerful content that connects, nurtures, and converts. So if you're ready to create standout content that gets you noticed and remembered, or build an aligned audience who love you and are ready to buy from you, you're in the right place. I believe that content has the power to connect us all. It's up to you how you use it. Listen in for genuine and insightful chats with guests, as well as practical tools and strategies from me. It's so lovely to have you here. Let's dive into the show. I acknowledge the Wongal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians of the country that I am recording from today. I recognise their continuing connection to the land and waters. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all First Nation people listening today. Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to episode 119 of the Powerful Content Podcast. Today we are chatting with the most beautiful human who I recently met as we were both contributors on a bundle run by Kate Doster. Now tell me, are you craving a simple, sustainable business that works with your burnt out neurodivergent brain? Then, if so, you need Kelsey Silver, the Neurospicy CEO. She's your go-to nerd for morphing that freedom business you've somehow just made as stressful as a 9-to-5 into a business that bankrolls your life while leaving you with enough energy left to enjoy it. Her clients say that they get more clarity in 2 hours than they have in 2 years, and she pulls the ideas out of their brain for them to put them into action. With credits like her Do It Anyway Summit and Build Your Fellowship program, she's a full-on Tolkien geek, and we might just talk about that. Kelsey takes the busy out of business when she's not mixing it up with AI, streamlining businesses, or debating which of her 6 beverages to sip next. You can find her gallivanting at a Ren fair with her daughter or in a kitty cuddle pile with her fur babies. Welcome to the podcast, Kelsey.
I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I always giggle when my own bio is read.
I've read it 1,000 times already, and I still had a bit of a giggle as I was saying it. So a couple of quick questions. Tolkien geek, what does that mean?
Huge Lord of the Rings nerd. In fact, my daughter is named out of a character that I will not name on the podcast, but yes.
Wow, that's amazing. And Ren Fair? What's a Ren Fair?
Renaissance fair. We get dressed up. We do the whole 9 yards. We have a blast. I've been cosplaying for over a decade at this point, and I make all of our costumes every year for Comic-Con too. Everything we dress up for, I make our costumes.
That is awesome. And last question, how many cats do you have?
I have 3, Thor, Freya, and Fenrir.
Of course you do. Now, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, we met whilst we were in a bundle as contributors for Kate Doster. And I was really struck, Kelsey, by the commonality of our messages. And even though that we have, slightly different niches and very different businesses, that commonality was to really work out what works best for you and do it that way. There's no right or wrong answer. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion today, and from a more systematic perspective instead of content. But before we dive into this discussion, I'd love for you, if you don't mind, to share a little bit about you and your journey to where you are today.
Sure, absolutely. So I harken back to the day I forgot to schedule my GREs. And that is where it all began. I was so excited and thrilled that I had just gotten engaged that I completely and utterly forgot to schedule my GREs and thus could not get into the master's program I wanted. I am US based, so GREs are a special test you have to take for your master's program. And I couldn't get in. I was going to get a PhD in operational psychology, and I couldn't. So I shopped around and I ended up becoming a marriage and family therapist. I got into the master's program based on a thesis that couples who play together stay together. If you play video games with your partner, you're more likely to love them more. And so thus began the infamous journey into therapy. And about halfway through my corporate career, I did join an agency. that halfway through my corporate career, I actually was invited into the operations side of things and absolutely fell in love. I'm still a licensed therapist, but I was an assistant vice president and an executive level inside a $30 million a year healthcare agency, and I loved making systems work. But on the side, I always wanted to have a side hustle. My father was an entrepreneur and owned several businesses. It's in the family. I never quite got rid of that itch. And so throughout the years, I've always had side hustles, and I finally decided that the techniques that you apply. I'm a black belt in Six Sigma, which is a process improvement structure. And those same kinds of concepts can apply to businesses, but I could never figure out why it didn't apply to me. And it was because I'm neurodivergent. And a lot of my business friends were neurodivergent, and the neurotypical advice out there just wasn't working for our brains. So I set out on a mission to help people figure out what actually works for them. So I use my corporate experience, my expertise I'm an MIT certified data analyst, and all that good stuff to make it work for your brain so that you don't actually create yourself another 9 to 5, but the freedom business that you're actually dreaming of.
Oh my goodness. I love listening to the stories of people and their journey to where they are today. It always surprises me the things that people come up with and the amazing experiences that they've had and how they then bring that to their business. Now, you mentioned, Kelsey, that you are neurodivergent. And you call yourself the Neurospicy CEO. So I would love for you to perhaps explain what neurodivergent is to you and what that means.
Absolutely. I love this question because a lot of people don't know the history of the term neurodivergent. It was
Okay.
actually coined way back in the 80s as a term for thinking other. And it was quite literally used in studies to simply identify people whose brains worked differently. And it's an actual structural neurological difference as opposed to something like, for example, depression, which is a chemical imbalance, but depression sometimes does fall under neurodivergent depending on the different types. But neurodivergent encompasses those whose brains are structured differently, which includes acquired brain injuries. ADHD, autism are the two that are typically referred to, but
Mm.
it includes Down syndrome, schizophrenia, and things like dyslexia, dyscalculia. I always say that one wrong. That's the people who can like color numbers turn into colors and all sorts of beautiful, incredible ways that brains can work. And the neurology of it always fascinated me. But neurodivergent has broadened its use in the last few years, particularly with the advent of social media. I mean, it's all over TikTok. You can't go 3 seconds without finding someone who, identifies as neurodivergent on TikTok. And it's a really beautiful thing. I do a lot of disability advocacy conversations and things like that. So, this advent of neurodivergence as a widely accepted term can be looked at a couple of different ways, and people sometimes become concerned if it's becoming too mainstream. But in my view, it's just bringing awareness to neurodivergence and the fact that different from neurodivergence, neurodiversity, which means that we are all different in the way that we think, is just as beautiful as being able to identify as neurodivergent. So neurodiversity is our ability to all think a little bit differently and be uniquely us. And neurodivergence is the subgroup of humans whose brains are actually wired differently.
Oh, wow. I love that definition. I've never heard it explained that way before in terms of the diversity as opposed to the neurodivergent people who identify as that. So
Yeah.
that's a really amazing explanation. And we are all beautiful, unique human beings, aren't we? That come to every problem, every experience, every moment in our life very, very differently. And that's also what makes us unique in our businesses as well, which is really exciting. So let's dive into this topic that we're going to talk about today. And in true Kelsey humor, love of Ren fairs and all things old world, you have this hilarious analogy, which I think is really perfect. I had to admittedly Google a few things, so we may need to explain some things to some
I got you.
people.
I got your back.
Thank you, Kelsey. But your analogy is around what do chainmail and systems have in common? So let's talk about chainmail first. What's chainmail?
Chainmail are those little tiny links that are all put together into a piece of clothing that goes underneath your armor, and it's that main line of defense that can stop a knife, an arrow, a spear, depending on how good your chainmail is how well you're protected.
Fabulous. So, we're going to talk about today how systems can be like this, which is really fantastic. So, when you are thinking about implementing systems, and we can speak to this from a neurodivergent point of view, or we can speak it from a neurodiverse point of view. I think that probably whichever way you go, Kelsey, people who don't identify as neurodivergent will be able to really
Yeah.
implement and understand what you're talking about today. So, when you're thinking about a system, I know that people kind of get a bit tense about systems and, automation and the depersonalization of things. But where would you recommend starting when it comes to systems?
So, just like with chainmail, you got to protect your vital bits first. And so, what I mean by that is you look at the most important and vital parts of your business. So, on a person, right, that's going to be the bit down under and your heart, probably, are the first things that are going to pop into people's minds. So, where do you get your enjoyment and what is the lifeblood of your business? And so, those are the two vital bits of your business. What makes it tick? So, whether that's you and your time, if you're a service based business, whether that is the onboarding process, if you're a course based business, etc., you figure out what makes it tick, what pumps the blood through the business. And that's the first vital bit. And then what is the piece that keeps you engaged, where you get your pleasure, your enjoyment, your excitement from? That's what I consider sort of the two extremities of the vital bits of your business. And then you start tiny, one link at a time. How can I protect every little bit? And you start slow. And I want to make a very clear distinction here. If we could just backtrack for 1 second.
Sure thing.
When I talk systems, I'm not talking automation. People get those two confused a lot. The faster you automate, the more likely you are to fail. And I use fail very generally. I love failure. I have master classes on how to fail well. So failure is not meant negatively here. But if you automate too quickly, you haven't proven your system. So I just want to make that distinction clear in this analogy. When we're saying systems, we're not talking about immediately automating. We're talking about protecting. And so you put that first link in. And that first link, let's start with a course-based business, right? Let's say that it's the onboarding process is really super important because it gets people engaged in your course. It makes sure that they are actually opening and don't, flake out a month in and then, whatever. And so maybe the first link is just that first onboarding email. And so you template it. You make sure that it's set up that when they purchase your course, it immediately goes out. That can be your first link of a system. You've done a system now. You've implemented. Good for you. And then you keep adding links on. And just like with chainmail, the piece gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it's a full tapestry that's covering that part of your business. And then you move to the next part of your business and you make that piece bigger and bigger. And then maybe you interlink them until soon you've got an entire piece of armor.
That's amazing. And I love that analogy so much. So, can I just clarify something else as well,
Yeah.
Kelsey, please? When you talk systems, it doesn't necessarily mean a piece of technology.
Not necessarily. Systems can be, particularly for the clients I work with who really identify as neurodivergent, forgetfulness is a primary symptomology that they have. And it's part of the executive dysfunction. And, we could get onto the science of it, but really it's just, let's broad strokes label it as forgetfulness. That can be really damaging to service-based businesses, to really all different kinds of businesses, because it implies something about you that might not be true. And so your clients may lose trust with you. So the more you can put things in place, whether that's reminders are a system, reminders on your phone, project management calendars are a system. Automation is a system, right? A technology piece, but so is putting in a team member. That's also a system. So what I teach my clients is you've got tech, team, and talent. You've got your technology, you've got your team, but then you've got your talent. and it's your unique, beautiful amazingness. But all three of those pieces work together to create this beautiful structure of your business. And systems are every little part of that. So it absolutely, systems do not have to be technology. I tend to gravitate towards technology to support my system, but the system is usually not the technology.
Yeah, and that's such an important distinction as well, I think, because a lot of people, when they hear the word system and systemization, they immediately go to the technology, the brand that they know. So whether that's like an Asana or a Trello for project management, whether it's the Kajabi or Teachable for the courses, they immediately go to those technology solutions. But what I'm hearing from you, Kelsey, is that it's more than that. It's not just the technology. It's, yes, you may use that as a tool, but it's understanding and working out exactly what works for you to solve the problem that you're trying to solve, or to protect the vital bits that you're trying to protect. And on another layer of that is working out what systems work with the tech, the team, and the talent as well.
Exactly. Can I give you a little example that I think might bring it back down to earth a little bit? I work with SOPs a lot. And for those of you that don't know what an SOP is, it's a standard operating procedure. That in and of itself is a system. And so every time you write an SOP, you have codified a system, you have put it into code. And those are living documents. Systems are living documents. Your chainmail is living. You can upgrade it, you can make it bigger. But a perfect SOP that I often suggest is a brand SOP. And all that is literally, what are your brand colors? What are the icons you typically use? And are there any templates that you use for most things? That's it. That's your system. There's no tech involved, unless you're like referencing Canva, right? But it's your hex codes, but that's it. It's probably a one-pager, but you never have to think of it again. Systems keep you from having to think about the same thing over and over and over again. But that's how simple a system can be. It can literally just be a list of your brand colors.
Yeah,
Congratulations, you have a system.
Yeah. Woo. I love that example, because once again, I think that people, when they hear the word systems, they go to big, they go to overwhelming, they go to too difficult, put it in the too hard basket. But when we bring it back to, like you suggest, to those little bits, what's the first step? What's that first little thing that I can do to make sure that I can protect myself and my business? Then that's amazing. And the brand SOP is a beautiful example, because if we're not using our brand in the correct way, then we're not putting ourselves out there in the correct way. We are, I guess we're devaluing our brand if we're not consistent with it. So I think that was a perfect example. Thanks, Kelsey.
Of course. And Mel, for you, it was so much of of the content that you talk about, and I love your podcast. So like, thrilled to be here because I've listened, right? But if you're sending a different message, if you're using different words all the time in your content, you're throwing people off. I'll tell you, I forget myself sometimes. I use very standard phrases, like very specific phrases that are very much me. But sometimes I get caught in that curse of the coach, like, oh, I have to say it this way because that's how everybody else is saying it thing. I refer back to I literally have in my brand SOP phrases that I use all the time that are really me. Like, okay, so that's one I use all the time. And exactly, because sometimes I forget myself.
I love that.
And that's how I protect me. I protect who I am through my SOP.
Beautiful. I love it. Who knew that SOPs could be so amazing? Go out and make yourself one right now. So the first point was that we can start slow. We can do one little piece at a time. So how else is chainmail like systems?
So we're going to have a contest of how to say something in just a moment. But because you and I are in very different parts of the world, so I'm going to say it wrong according to you, and that's okay. I am available to be wrong. So I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana. So what I'm about to say is going to sound weird, but here we go. Chainmail can be made from the crappiest thing you want at the beginning. It can be made from aluminum. And your systems can be the same, because guess what? Something that's made from aluminum is still stronger than nothing. Sitting out on a battlefield, nothing but your birthday suit, not so protected. Having a little layer of aluminum, you never know, you might get some protection out of that. Layer it up a couple layers thick and you might get something even better. But systems are the same way. You can start as simple as you want. You can start with an SOP that's literally just your brand colors and add things to it later. You can start with just an onboarding email and then add an entire engagement sequence to it. You can start with something very, very simple and bare bones that feels kind of icky because it's all you've ever done and you're just putting something on paper, and you can strengthen it. So first thing we were doing was starting slow and building, but you can also start simple and strengthen. Your systems should be living. Every time something goes not quite right, you identify the issue, you identify how the system can alter to prevent that issue in the future, and you now have a stronger system because of it. There's the failures of the system. Like I said, I love me a good failure because all it does is teach me how to strengthen the system more. So if you have those failures more often, identify where the failure happened, fix that system up, you've now doubled the aluminum. Or maybe you've gone to steel, or maybe you're even going to get stronger. And so every time you add another layer of protection on the same link, your whole chainmail gets stronger.
I love that idea of something is better than nothing. And because we often scared to take that first step because we feel like it needs to be this perfect, massive, big solution, don't we? Like we feel like, well, if I do this, then I really need to do this, and I really need to do this, and it has to look like this. And then all of a sudden, this link becomes something that's absolutely massive.
Well, I even deal with that when I'm making our costumes, right? Like, oh, all the peripherals I have to make. And like I made a full screen accurate Tariel costume when The Hobbit came out. We won't talk about that one. I may or may not have hand embroidered her sleeves from the movie. I didn't need to do that. But that's where my brain went. My brain immediately went to, it must be screen accurate. I was going to a Comic-Con. There was no one in that building that was going to analyze. I wasn't in a competition. There was no one that was going to analyze my hand embroidery. But it felt so necessary to have it perfect. We do the same thing in our business. It feels life-alteringly important. If we don't do this launch this way, my business will never be successful. If this reel doesn't get this many votes, wow, tells you how much I do for social media. If this reel doesn't get this many views, clearly I have failed as a business owner and I should throw in the towel. We put so much importance on, in the grand scheme of things, meaningless moments in our business. And that perfectionism stops us. I specialize, right? Like the people that I work with the closest are burnt out. They are people who have been overachievers their entire life. They are the good girls, the perfect straight A's, the perfectionists that have ruined their health, their life, their family time, because all they've done their whole life is strive for perfection. And they're just repeating the same darn thing in their business, expecting a different result. It's the theory of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Hello, am I calling anyone out here, right?
100%, yes.
I did the same thing. I did the same thing in my business. I'm not going to lie. It doesn't have to be perfect the first time. And every iteration will make it far more perfect than it could have been if you tried to make it perfect the first time. You can't think of every eventuality.
Yeah, such an important reminder for us all. I think, Kelsey, that, perfection, if we're striving for that perfection constantly, we are going to end up in that burnout and overwhelm state. But then sometimes things don't even get done at all because we feel as though we can't take that first step because it has to be so big and so perfect. So thank you for sharing that with us. So we're starting slow. We're starting with something is better than nothing.
Exactly.
Is there something else?
The easiest and most appropriate way to make a system is when you go to do something next in your business, literally the next thing you do. record yourself doing it. Start with what you're already doing. That is a system. Even if you don't do it the same time, the same way every single time, that's okay. The next time you go to do it, write down whether you're dictating to Zoom, whether you're doing Scribe, whether you're using Loom, however you need to do it yourself, jotting in a notebook, write down or record exactly how you do the next thing. You now have a system. Build off of it next time, expand off of it, but your system should mimic what you're already doing. And every time you go to do something new in your business, write that down, because guess what? You now have a system. And every single time you go to do the thing, follow that system. You'll figure out real quick what feels icky, or what I've noticed with my clients, that you need a couple different versions of a system based on your energy level. I've got 3 different versions of every single SOP in my business.
Oh, tell us
I've got
more.
the
Tell us more.
I've got the I've got all the spoons version. So if you're not familiar with spoons theory, think of it like you have a certain number of spoons in a day. Every time you have to make a decision or expend energy, you lose a spoon. Okay? People refer to them as marbles, whatever. But you have a finite amount of energy and decision making. So I've got all the spoons to spend, which is my very high level, just an outline of my process, very like spacious, creative system, SOP, right? Then I kind of got some spoons version, which is I need a little bit more detail. I probably need some reminders. And then I've got no spoons to give version. And that is literally every step. I could hand it over to my 3-year-old daughter and she could do the same darn thing. And so every SOP is divided. It's essentially my outline, my reminders and details, and then the full procedure. Every SOP I have has those 3 versions. Because what it does is when I'm really super energized and raring to go, I don't feel bogged down by the tiny minutia detail. But when my brain is shot, but I still need to do the thing, I've got it in my back pocket if I need it. So if you have your systems mimic what you're already doing, you follow that same system every time, you'll start to see where your energy ebbs and flows and how you can alter your system to support you regardless of that energy level.
Oh, I love that idea so much, Kelsey. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, because I think that some people think that there is a SOP or there is a system, a way of doing things, and that's the be all and end all, and there's no flexibility within that at all. But what I'm hearing from you is that depending on the level of energy that you have almost like a minimum viable
Exactly.
SOP
Mhm.
that you
Exactly.
can.
And that applies to it applies to neurotypical individuals as well. You don't have to define yourself or identify as neurodivergent for you to have energy fluctuations. You might have chronic illness, you might have a toddler running around at home, you might have another 9 to 5 or multiple jobs. Doesn't matter what the root cause of energy fluctuations is. Acknowledging that you are a different person throughout the day, the week, the quarter, the year, and that's okay. Your system should support that.
Yeah. So our systems are unique in individuals. So my system would
Yep.
be different to your system for exactly the same thing, but it can also be different for us as individuals as well. So it can be depending on our level of energy. Love it. Love it so much. So thank you for that. Thank you for those 3 things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So systems are like chainmail because you can start slow. You can start with something very flimsy. So it's better, to start with something than nothing at all. And then the third thing is creating those systems that mimic what you already do and adjusting accordingly.
Mhm.
Love that so
Mhm.
much. Thank
Iterate,
you.
iterate, iterate.
Perfect. Now, I know that you have so much experience and knowledge in this space, and I just want to pick your brain with one more thing if I can. And this is around understanding where to start, where exactly to start. We've kind of covered that, but I know that you have a free resource that people can get their hands on, which is to find and fix your biggest operational roadblock in under 1 hour. Tell me how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. So in that workbook, it's a workbook because not everybody can sit through a course. You can go through it at your own pace, but it really walks you through sort of where your talent lies, but also where you struggle the most in your business. Because often, while we're protecting ourselves and covering up our vital bits, we have a spot that always is our blind spot. It always kind of things fall through the crack. That's the bottleneck in your business. So let's get rid of that. Let's just figure out a system to put in place that we can implement literally in an hour that's going to ease us through. Think of like removing that one stick out of a dam and the whole thing collapses through. Kind of the same concept. We're going to find that little stick, pull it out, and the whole thing's going to go away. Now, obviously, it's not an overnight thing, right? But in an hour, literally set the timer and give yourself an hour. You can implement one system that's going to bring some ease back into your business, relieve you of some of that stress, and let you move on to things that are actually going to bring you revenue.
Perfect. Love it so much. I'll make sure that I put the link in the show notes for that free resource. I have actually downloaded it myself, Kelsey, and I think it's a pretty fab document to kind of walk you through, like you said, find those blind spots that you don't necessarily know that you have and be able to fix them as well. I loved it so much. So thank you. Kelsey, before we finish up today, I am all about women owning and using their superpowers. I would love to know, what is your superpower?
I am a big picture, tiny microcosm thinker. I like to think that I can play 16 games of three-dimensional chess at the same time. And what I mean by that is that I can look at someone's business and pretty quickly, I'd say within the first half an hour, I can figure out where their bottlenecks are, where they're focusing on low ROI tasks when they could be focusing on some really high ROI stuff. And I can usually map out a 2 to 5 year strategic plan that's going to get them to that number, that's going to let them escape their 9 to 5 and actually spend time with their family and not be sitting, not speaking from personal experience here at all, not be sitting at family movie night, thinking of all the tasks that they have to get done in their business and feeling guilty because they're not spending time watching the movie with their family. So I like to think of my superpower as being able to see that big picture and kind of project out where we can put something in place that's going to bring some of that ease in. I know that's kind of a weird one, but that's what I like to think of.
It's not weird at all. I wish that I had that superpower, most definitely. It's an amazing superpower. And do you have any final parting words of wisdom, Kelsey?
I want to harken back to probably the biggest point we've made in this conversation.
Yep.
And that is that you just start with the tiniest piece of the puzzle or the easiest piece. Just like when building an actual jigsaw puzzle and you get all the same colored pieces together, or you build your outline. Everyone starts a puzzle differently, but we all have similar place we start. We start with what's easiest for us. So start with what's simplest for you. Start there and just keep building out from there.
Beautiful words of wisdom. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, making me laugh and sharing your wisdom with my listeners. I truly appreciate you being here.
I have absolutely loved this conversation, Mel. Thank you so much for bringing me on, and hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks so much for listening. That's it for another week. To get more powerful content in your life, make sure you're following along on socials. My handle is @meldbusiness. And just in case you're wondering, the groovy music for this podcast was created by Just Here on SoundCloud. I'd also be super grateful if you took a moment to rate and review this podcast so more amazing women like you can experience the power of content. And if you're like, hell Mel, stop talking, I'm ready to work with you now, here's how we can work some powerful content magic together. Firstly, come and join the Content Effect, my membership inspiring women with service-based businesses to ditch the content chaos and start creating stand-out content that gets you noticed and makes sales. You can join us by using the link in the show notes or just Google the Content Effect. The second way we can work together is via my one-on-one packages. We can create a sustainable content strategy or start to build out your client journey. It's up to you. Hop on over to meldbusinessservices.com.au/services to find out more. Until next time, have a beautiful week and embrace the power of your content.